Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most miraculous things any of us ever accomplish. Something we all do, but honestly, few of us really understand how we learn to talk. So, how does it happen? I mean, really think about it. How do we get from a baby's nonsensical babbling to a child who can tell you a complex, imaginative story? It's a fundamental question that has puzzled scientists and parents for decades. For the better part of a century, four major theories have been in the ring, competing to explain this incredible process. We've got the behaviorists, the nativists or innateness theory, the cognitive theory, and the interactionists. Today, we're going to unpack each one. Okay, let's start with what seems like the most obvious, straightforward answer. This is an idea that was championed by the famous psychologist B.F. Skinner. Skinner was well known for his experiments with animals, and he basically proposed that we humans learn to speak in pretty much the same way, through a system of rewards and corrections, what we call positive and negative reinforcement. So the process, at least on the surface, seems simple enough, right? A kid imitates a word, let's say milk. They get praise, or even better, they get the milk they wanted. That success reinforces the word, they repeat it, and boom, it becomes a habit. If this is true, if this is the whole story, then a child's speech should just be a smaller, maybe less perfect version of adult speech, right? They hear a word, they copy it. Simple. But is it really that simple? Well, things get really interesting when we start listening to the so-called mistakes that kids make. For example, you'll often hear a little kid say something like, "I drinked the juice." And this one simple question exposes a massive flaw in the pure imitation theory. I mean, think about it. If they were only copying us, where on earth would they have heard the word drinked? These mistakes are actually called virtuous errors because they are, in a way, intelligent mistakes. They prove the child isn't just a little parrot. They show that the child's brain is actively figuring out grammatical rules, like adding ed to make something past tense, and then they're just over-applying that rule to everything. And this famous exchange from back in 1966 illustrates the point perfectly. Kids often literally can't repeat adult grammar if they haven't figured out the underlying rule for themselves. I mean, even after 8 tries, the child in this study just could not say the correct sentence. So yeah, the evidence against pure imitation really starts to stack up. All kids go through similar learning stages, no matter what. Parents tend to correct for truth. No, that's a dog, not a cat, not grammar. And there seems to be this critical window for learning. So simple imitation and reward, it just can't be the whole story. All right, let's move on to the powerful counterpunch. This was a revolutionary idea from the linguist Noam Chomsky, and it completely changed the game. Chomsky pointed out a huge problem with Skinner's idea. The language kids hear around them is, well, it's often a mess. Adults speak in fragments, we interrupt each other, we make mistakes. And yet, from this impoverished input, as he called it, children somehow manage to extract these perfect, complex grammatical rules. So how? He proposed that we are all born with something he called a language acquisition device, or LAD for short. You can think of it like a special processor in our brain, one that's hardwired with a kind of universal grammar that contains the basic principles of all human languages. And this brings us right to the heart of the great debate that defined this field for decades: nature versus nurture. Was language something we learn entirely from our environment, from the outside in, like Skinner said? Or was it an innate ability we're born with, just waiting to be activated, growing from the inside out, as Chomsky proposed? Now, there are 3 really powerful lines of evidence that support Chomsky's idea. First, just look at our anatomy. Our vocal tracts, specific language centers in our brain, they're all uniquely built for speech. Second, look at what are called Creole languages. When kids are exposed to a very basic makeshift language, a pidgin, they spontaneously turn it into a brand new, complex, fully grammatical language. And third, deaf children develop sign languages that have all the grammatical complexity of spoken ones. Amazing. But Chomsky's theory wasn't the whole story either. The really tragic case of a boy known as Jim showed a critical missing piece. His deaf parents exposed him to tons of language, but only through the TV and radio. He had all the language input you could want, but without actual human interaction, he failed to learn to speak. So clearly, this innate device wasn't enough on its own. And this brings us to 2 other crucial theories that really help us move beyond a simple nature versus nurture debate and add some much-needed nuance. The Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget had a different take. He argued that language learning is tied to our overall intellectual development. In other words, you have to understand a concept first before you can find the words for it. You can't use words like bigger or smaller until your brain can actually grasp the concept of size comparison. And you can actually see this link in action. Around 18 months, kids have this massive vocabulary explosion. Well, guess what? This happens right around the same time they finally master object permanence, the understanding that a toy still exists even after you hide it behind your back. Once they know it's there, they need a name for it. It just makes sense. Finally, we have Jerome Bruner, who highlighted the critical role of social interaction, the very thing that was missing for Jim. Bruner proposed a language acquisition support system, or LAS. This is basically all the support that caregivers provide, playing peekaboo, taking turns in conversation, using that high-pitch baby talk. All of that scaffolds the learning process and works in partnership with our innate abilities. So, after all these decades of debate, with all these competing ideas, who wins? Which theory is the right one? Well, the real answer, and this is the crucial takeaway, is that there is no single winner. Language acquisition is an incredibly complex interplay of all four theories. It seems we are born with an innate ability for language, just like Chomsky said. But that ability has to be activated and nurtured by social interaction, as Bruner argued. It's guided by our cognitive development, as Piaget described. And yes, it's absolutely fine-tuned by imitation and reinforcement from our world, just as Skinner proposed. This incredible synthesis leaves us with a really fascinating final question to ponder. If a complex system like language is literally woven into our biology, just waiting to be switched on, what other amazing, uniquely human abilities might we be born with?